Okay. So we have a great agenda for everyone this evening. We have, first of all, we're going to have Katie Gibb from the RSPB. She's a conservation officer in the Antrim Plateau and is going to give a talk about the importance of grassland habitats for farmland birds and biodiversity. And Katie is a group scheme facilitator for the Antrim Hills Curlew Initiative. We then are going to have Francis Flanagan from the RSPB as well. He's the facilitator for the Bann Valley Habitat Restoration Initiative, and he's going to give a talk about how you actually go about restoring meadows on your farm and the support available to do so, things like the environmental farming scheme. And then we're going to have a talk from a guest speaker, Réamaí Mathers, from the Glens of Antrim flower fed Dexters, talking about wildflower rich swards and plants of importance for animal health and productivity. So obviously Réamí's speaking from his own experience of his own farm business, and really looking forward to that as well. But just in terms of a bit of background before we get to the first talk. So the Environmental Farming Scheme, it's administered by the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, DERA, and it's a voluntary scheme which gives farmers support to carry out nature-friendly farming practices on their agricultural land. And a group project sits within the Environmental Farming Scheme, and it's basically there to promote a coordinated activity among EFS agreement holders to really enhance the environmental outcomes in certain areas. So if there's like an area of special scientific interest or a special protection area, that sort of site you would tend to find groups. And there's several EFS group projects around Northern Ireland, and tonight's webinar is a training event collectively organised by 3 EFS group projects which are facilitated by the RSPB in Northern Ireland. So one of those groups is the Bann Valley Habitat Restoration Initiative, which is facilitated by Francis Flanagan, who's going to give a talk tonight. And this EFS group project, it's really focused on restoring and managing priority habitats and species at sites at Loch Beg, the lower Bann Valley and its tributaries. And we basically work with farmers through EFS to manage and restore the species-rich grassland there, the wet grassland, peatland, heathland, and other wetland habitats. The target species include snipe, lapwing, redshank, curlew, and then you got things like Irish lady tresses and the marsh fritillary butterfly. And if any of you know this area, you'll know how magnificent a site it is. You can see some of the wetland and grassland habitat in the photo there, and you've got Church Island in the background. You know, it's a very important site and home to an abundance of wildlife, and it's great to see the EFS group and the farmers there doing things for the wildlife that call that area home. We then have the Antrim Hills Curlew Initiative, which is facilitated by Katie Gibb from RSPB, and it's working with around 40 farmers in one of the last and best curlew hotspots in Northern Ireland. And this is an area, you know, it's a real mosaic of habitats, including like, you know, pristine blanket bog, you've got dry and wet heathland, you've got unimproved grasslands, rushy pastures, improved grasslands, and all of those collectively, they're really supporting nature on that site, as well as the farmers that manage that land. And through the Environmental Farming Scheme, the group project, the farmers there, were supporting them in managing the land for upland wildlife, but specifically with breeding waders like curlew in mind. And this is achieved through habitat management like rush cutting, wet features like scrapes and drain reprofiling, and then you have scrub control, and then the appropriate grassland management associated with the habitat. And that group, you know, added with the help of conservation projects such as Curlew Life, is really halting the decline of curlew around these parts. You know, 2021 was the most successful breeding record, most successful season on record that we have there on that site. So obviously the EFS group and the conservation efforts in that area are doing really well. Then we have the County Down Farmland Bird Initiative. This is the group that I facilitate on behalf of the RSPB. It was launched in 2020. We've got about just over 20 farms in it at this stage. We've got a long established experience of working with farmers in County Down, going back to, like, you know, the late 90s. There was the project of the Volunteer Farmer Alliance. We then had the Yellowhammer Recovery Project. So the County Down Farmland Bird Initiative is like the most recent evolution of our work in County Down, with being a very strong arable region, It's an important area for a range of seed-eating bird species, which are reliant on that sort of habitat. Key species are seed eaters like yellowhammer, skylark, linnet, but other iconic farmland birds such as kestrel and barn owl as well. A majority of our group members would be in the wider level for creating like seed-rich habitats, things like rough grass margins, pollinator margins, improving hedgerows. But even for seed-eating birds like yellowhammer, areas of species-rich grassland and hay meadows can hugely improve the habitat available for them, particularly in the spring and summer. But I believe Katie's going to go into that in her talk, so I won't say anything else so as not to spoil Katie's talk. But that's why a number of County Down group members are present for this evening's talk. So, but overall, the main aim of all these EFS groups is to halt and reverse the decline of some of Northern Ireland's most iconic farmland birds. And that's what the EFS groups are there to do. So again, here we have the agenda. So first of all, we're going to have Katie Gibb, then Francis Flanagan, then Réamaí Mathers, and there will be a wee comfort break after Francis Flanagan's talk, and just to give everyone a wee toilet break or make a wee cup of tea just before the last session. And just to reiterate again, everyone will be muted by the person speaking, and there will then be the opportunity for Q&A after each of the individual talks. But if you would like to ask a question, you can pop it into the chat box at any stage, or just raise your hand during the Q&A. But without further ado, I will now hand you over to Katie Gibb to give the first talk of the evening.
Thanks, Mark. I'll just share my screen, get that all going. That coming up okay?
Perfect.
Brilliant. All right, so well, evening all. Yeah, so Mark has given us a really brilliant introduction into our group schemes and kind of what the idea of tonight is all about. We wanted to start this evening off with a closer look at grassland biodiversity and get more into the why before we get into the how of grassland restoration. So grassland is a really important habitat here in Northern Ireland, with over 75% of our land classed as agricultural grassland. It makes up a huge proportion of our country. And I think it's overlooked a lot for more hot topics like forest and peatland and wetlands for its role in climate change and climate change mitigation. But the grassland and the management of them is just as vital for turning the table on climate change and biodiversity crisis that we have found ourselves in at the moment. So, oh, that's not moving. So I wanted to, ecosystem services is a brilliant way to get kind of into this topic. So ecosystem services is just a term that really describes the many and varied benefits to human provided by the natural environment, and especially from a healthy ecosystem. So with a whole lot of farmers here, of course, the first thing and the most important thing we get from our grassland is definitely the food production. You guys are feeding not only our nation, but you know, we do export a lot of our food grown here, off to many different countries. But the value of the grassland extends much beyond just that of farming. They play a massive role in climate mitigation through carbon uptake, water regulation, and soil stabilization. So, and the other one, of course, especially with Slimish up in Glenworry, is cultural. You know, like this is a really important landscape for, you know, for the story of St. Patrick. You know, he was a shepherd on, you know, in the shadow of Slimish. So we have a lot of tourism up there as well, and also the cultural aspect of farmland within this country. You know, so grasslands are very valuable to us, and not just for food production. Unfortunately, here in the UK, we have lost about 97% of our species-rich grasslands since the 1950s. So, so protecting and restoring the ones we've left is really important. And alongside this comes correct management for this, and trying to get back to a balanced ecosystem. When we're talking about biodiversity in grassland, we're not just talking about diversity in the sward, we're also talking about the different types of grasslands that we have here in Northern Ireland. So we have upland versus lowland grasslands. We also have the acidic grassland of Glenwarry, the calcareous grasslands of County Down. So these are your chalk grasslands. You've got your neutral grasslands. So these are normally your hay meadows. And then you've got the wet grasslands of Lochbeck. And also with biodiversity, just as we're going into this, with the biodiversity of these different grasslands, this is all relative biodiversity. So in the acidic grasslands, in a really healthy acidic grassland, you could have 10 species in a field, whereas in the chalk grasslands in County Down, it could be 30 per square metre. So it's just all very different. And this is what you'll see us do when we're going around doing your plans for your environmental farming scheme with those poles, and we're just checking out all the different species on each grassland. We can, from the species that we get, which we find, we can kind of establish the health of the grassland. And that's how we figure out which kind of management type of management option through EFS to put it in. And so it's into the right management option through grazing and the other MPIs that you can get. Oh. Right, so talking about grassland biodiversity is a pretty complicated system. I've attempted to, and it's definitely not my expertise, but I've attempted to break it down. And it's a really big feedback system. So, I'm going to jump in from the ground up, but it's a feedback system, so it's complicated anyway, but so soil is really important for the health of your grasslands. There's two things to take into account here. The first one is your microbial biomass, and this is pretty much just the bacteria and fungi which live and thrive in your soil. So the higher soil microbial biomass you've got, this just means the healthier your soil is going to be. So you're going to have better soil aggregation, you're going to have higher water holding capacity. So this is all to do with your flood mitigation. And the more you're going to have, with higher biomass, you're going to have more rapid soil, carbon and nutrient turnover. So all of this is going to benefit your vegetation growth. The other thing is the diversity in root systems. So with higher vegetation biodiversity, you're going to have a whole diversity of root systems. And so root systems, you're going to have some that go deeper into your soils, being able to tap different nutrient levels within the soil. And all that's going to feed back to how much growth you're going to get on the top side. Just something I wanted to point out here is that when you have a species-rich grassland, which is in really good condition, it can store over 100 times more tons of soil carbon per hectare than improved grassland. And I think that's something just to take away from this, especially as we are moving into a more carbon credit type base payment system. If that is the way that the payment systems go, to take into account how much carbon that your grasslands is taking up is a really important factor in how you move your business from an agricultural sense forward. As we move away from single farm payment. So after soil, we go to vegetation and sward structure. The key here is diversity. So the more species we have, the better the structure of the vegetation, which results in more niches, which is just a fancy way of saying that there's lots of different types of habitat within your sward structure. And with all of this, you're going to get more insects. There's a couple of different species I just wanted to highlight. So the first one is Devil's Bitscavius. I'm sure many of you will recognize this. This is a really important plant for a number of our species, insect species in Northern Ireland. And this is the population of this is definitely decreasing. And it's just something I wanted to highlight. It is mentioned in a lot of the, especially in purple moorgrass or anyone who's in a marsh fertility area, you will have restrictions on your cutting around the flowering time, and this is for the insects. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize this incredible, beautiful little mushroom. This is your wax cat. And I just wanted to highlight this because this is just such a wonderful little indicator species, which will only grow when we've got really poor nutrients in the soil, which is really good for a species-rich grassland. And yeah, they're just one of my favorite things to stumble across up in the hills. Two orchids, which actually Mark mentioned with Fran's introduction. So we've got two amber listed species that the RSPB do kind of take note of. And this one over here is your Irish ladies trestle, which is really interesting because it's an amber listed species, but it's naturalized over here. So it came from America. No one's 100% sure how, but it just made its way over here. It was always pretty low on the ground, but their numbers are definitely decreasing. And then you've got your lesser butterfly orchid over here, which is a very beautiful orchid, which I get to count a lot up in Glenmorry. And this is another Northern Irish priority species of conservation concern. In the UK, we've lost about 60% of our sites, and Northern Ireland is definitely seen as a stronghold for the species. Insects. So species-rich grassland is vital for our pollinators, which is a huge percent of the pollinators are your insects, bees, moths, flies, bumblebees, butterflies, pretty much everything. With the diversity of flowering time with a diverse sward, it means that you're going to get more food for these insects. A couple of species I've got here, which I kind of just wanted to mention is, well, it was a full cricket. I don't know quite what has happened there. The cricket's just in there just to talk about just general insects. So the more insects you have, the more species you're going to pretty much feed. This is specifically important for breeding waders. Also your passerines, so the birds that Mark works a lot with. Your seed eaters who will swap to insects to feed their young during the breeding season. And you're going to get these through your rough margins and your species-rich grasslands. The next one, probably none of you really want to see this. This is your crane fly. So the young of these are your leather jackets, which I know can be a bit of a bother to when you get a huge mat of the leather jackets. But these are a huge source of food for mammals and birds alike. You'll see in the winter massive flocks of starling and thrushes just feeding on them. And then in the early spring, you'll have the breeding waders returning to the breeding site, and they'll be using these to really get into condition for laying of eggs. The next two, I just have these up because I really wanted to talk about the loss of specialists. And this is a huge thing especially when you're losing 97% of your, species-rich grassland. These two here, so we've got our marsh fertility butterfly, and then we've got our narrow-bordered bee hawk moth. And both of these use the Devil's Bitscavius. So the caterpillars of both these insects use it as food. And so with the loss of the devil's spit scabious, we are losing these habitat specialists and these absolute stunning habitat specialists. And then, of course, we go into our mammals, our otters. So when I was talking about the water purification of grassland ecosystem service, you know, as we get more higher quality streams in our uplands and in our agricultural land, you know, we're going to have more fish, and therefore it's going to support these mammals. Then we've also got our mice and rats, and this is also, they'll also be feeding off your insects, which in turn feed your barn owls or your birds of prey. And then we've got our Irish here. So these are your feeding on your grasses, your heather, your herbs, your sedges, and once again they will be feeding, you know, your apex predators that we have here. So your foxes. Up in Glenwarry we have one golden eagle, and we have one of the highest densities of the Irish hare up there. So you know, that's what all these guys are feeding off. And then I just, from soil to sky, so I thought I would end, of course, on the birds. So birds are a really brilliant indicator of ecosystem health. So the higher diversity you have with birds, pretty much the better state, you know, your ecosystem is in. So this is like up in Glenwarry, it's an absolute biodiversity hotspot, and we, you know, through our breeding waders and our hen harriers, you know, and all this just trickles down to all the way back down to your soil health and your insect levels, you know, because they're feeding the skylarks and the meadow pipits, and then up into, your hen harriers. And then, as I was saying, you've got down in County Down, you have your yellowhammers, which it's a last stronghold for the yellowhammers down in County Down, and same with the barn owl. So we've got these real cool biodiversity hotspots, and yeah, absolutely incredible work that has been done over the years. I only just put this up because it's just a real interest talking about biodiversity and different niches. So these are 3 different waders that we work on, and they all feed off the insects within our within Glenwarry. And you can just look at the different bill. I was just gonna, it's just a very old, just looking at the bill length, you know, these guys are feeding in different niches. And so the more different little niches you have, the more biodiversity you're going to have. You're just going to feed those populations. I wanted to keep this as upbeat as possible, but I also thought it was pretty important to talk, just to touch on what we have lost. I hope you can hear that. You know, we have lost the corn crake from mainland Northern Ireland. It's a pretty disastrous loss, and this is definitely through the loss of hay meadows. And we've retained some in Rathlin, and there is a movement to try and get them back onto the mainland. But yeah, this is just pretty much through the loss of hay meadows. And the trough I just put up there because the reason we have lost the trough from mainland Northern Ireland is due to a habitat loss, and also using licks and drenches, which the byproduct of that gets into the manure and then feeds the insects, and these guys feed off the insects, and so you have something called bioaccumulation within the populations, and we just lost them due to they lost condition pretty much. So in terms, just looking at the time, okay, so you know, there is a widespread resurgence in natural product medication. And this is driven by major threats posed by, you know, multi-resistant pests or disease organisms. So, and the expense of, you know, synthetic chemicals. And, you know, with biodiversity in your sward, you'll have stuff like squirrel and birds feed trefoil, which are natural dewormers, and then you've also got bed straw. So this is this beautiful, or this is ladies' bed straw over here, which we get up in Glewari a lot. And these are insecticides, so natural insecticides, which is just the less through EFS, you're not allowed to put any insecticides on your land anyway. So having diversity in your sward, which will hopefully keep some of those costs down that way, is just a really cool byproduct of letting biodiversity go on your land. I'm going to go through 2 quick examples of through biodiversity and in our which have 2 examples of how species-rich grassland really help through our group schemes. So this is first one. This is one of Mark's examples. So we have one hay meadow on this farm, and that's highlighted there in green. Now these little round circles are our different birds that he's found on his surveys. So you've got your yellowhammer and your tree sparrows. And so these are 2 of the priority species that Mark works with. And as you can see, those territories that those birds set up are very, very close to the hay meadow. And this is due to high insect numbers. This field here is actually a barley field, but it has the EFS wider option of a rough grass margin. So you can just see that we're also getting quite high diversity with the passerines there. And once again, this is all just down to insect numbers and also probably with late seeding grasses. The next example I have is up in my site, and this is the snipe. So this is a population just graph of the snipe numbers that we've had since 2002. And as you can see, we've got really incredible population growth. So we've had 2 different projects here. First off, we had HELP, which is Halting Environmental Loss Project. And this is really similar to the EFS scheme that we have going now. It all had to do with advisory from a conservation advisor, habitat management through scrub control, drain reprofiling, scrape creation. So yeah, scrub trees and scrub were removed, and the grazing regimes were very close to that of EFS. And you can just tell the incredible response we've had from snipe. If only we could get this from curlew. I mean, we're getting that way, but they're a lot more difficult. I have gone over my time, so I will skip through this. And I just wanted to end on helping biodiversity on your land. I mean, the first thing is being conscious of what you've got. You've got a huge resource in both in me, Mark, and Fran in your key areas. So just give us a call. More than happy to help you out always. One of the key aims of the higher scheme is to restore, preserve, and enhance biodiversity. So there's so much potential for species-rich grassland restoration here in Northern Ireland. And, like the whole idea of this is to make existing grasslands bigger, better, and more connected for nature. And yeah, there's a couple of just things up there to keep in mind. So your habitat management, rush control, scrub control, scrape creation, hedge laying. This, you get paid through EFS for all of this kind of stuff. Make sure you're cutting at the right time, and when you're cutting, make sure it's a nature-friendly way of mowing. You've got your rough grass margins for insect, and then you've also got your winter food crops for your seed-eating birds. But yeah, that is all for me. Thank you so much.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Katie. Next up, we're going to have Francis Flanagan. But before that, I was just again wanting to give people the opportunity to potentially ask some questions. There might be some time at the end as well, but I thought we'd do a few smaller Q&A sessions at the end of each talk. So again, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand, or feel free to type it into the chat box there as well. If you do think of something at a later stage of the evening, just still feel free to pop it into the chat box, and we will answer it as best we can. And if you're a bit shy and you want to maybe follow up with us afterwards, please do. I'll have our contact details at the end of the session. But is there any questions so far? We're good so far. Okay, Fran, if you're ready to go, Fran wants to share his presentation, we can move on with that. But like I said, folks, feel free to use the chat function. I'll pop a wee message into that now, just so everyone knows where it is.
Excellent. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming tonight. My name's Francis Flanagan. I'm the Conservation Officer for Loch Ney and the Bann Valley, and I am Facilitator for the Bann Valley Group scheme, which includes Loch Beg and the River Bann and its tributaries. So my background is, before coming to Northern Ireland, I spent 13 years working for English Nature and latterly Natural England, which is the equivalent of kind of NIA in England. My role there was working with farmers to restore species grasslands. We're in the West Midlands, is where the highest concentration of lowland meadows are in the UK, and so a lot of our work was restoring these grasslands. So I'd like to share a bit about that, the successes we had, and kind of tips about that tonight. So we've just heard from Katie about the importance of grasslands. So I'm going to talk about, and I've been contacted quite a lot talking about how to go about restoring, and people being interested in restoring species grasslands. So that's what I want to talk about tonight, particularly focusing on meadows, lowland meadows, but also same principles can be carried over to upland meadows and other grassland habitats. So an overview, what I'm going to speak to you tonight about. I'll touch upon soil fertility, seed limitations, talk about wildflower establishment, tips and kind of increasing that establishment success, talk about management, grazing and support on offer for group members. So, soil fertility. So, with a lot of our wildflower species, they're generally what's termed as stress tolerators. In that, many of them really thrive in habitats where we've got low fertility. So, this particularly with phosphorus and P levels, what we found is elevated P levels in our soils. It can seriously limit the success of grassland restoration. So the first thing, if we're looking at a site that we want to restore, is having a look of where we're starting from. What is our grassland like, and key to that is doing soil tests and looking at our P indices. And what we've found is that if we've got an indice of 0 or 1, that's going to, you're going to more likely to get success from grasslands with those kind of P levels. Where we start to get that creeping up to 2, I think that's fine, as long as we've got other management and we've got the grazing and everything lined up to undertake the restoration. But particularly sites that are higher than that, we're going to be fighting against it, because there's going to be, as a result of those higher P levels, there are going to be much more competitive grasses that are going to be being competitive against the wildflowers that we're trying to establish in the sward. So P has quite a complex relationship, and there are many factors influencing whether the restoration is going to be a success. But the elevated P levels has shown that that can really count against the success rate particularly in later years, getting that competitive edge against grasses. So ideally, we choose sites with P levels. So we do our soil tests, and what we want to be looking at is ideally 0 or 1, which are quite impoverished soils. But we can go with 2. If they're higher than that, we need to reconsider. Is this an appropriate site to undertake a wildflower restoration on? Seed limitations. Well, our desirable plant species in our meadows, for a lot of them, they've got severe dispersal limitations. I mean, there are some species that do travel quite far. Orchids, for example, are very small seeds carried on the wind. But for the vast majority of the plant species in our meadows, they don't go very far. And quite often they're reliant on large herbivores to move them, either through their gut as they eat the vegetation and defecate, or getting trampled and hooved and moved around in that manner. So even if we've got species-rich grasslands next door to where we want to restore, unless we're doing some intervention, it's going to be a long time coming before we're going to get some, successful restoration of the site. So we really need to be bringing that wildflower seed onto our site that we want to restore. So firstly, seed application. So seed is using native seed and broadcasting it on a site. It is a very effective means of getting wildlife, establishing wildflowers on our site. The problem is it's unlikely to be local. So when we get our native seed, we could probably be sure to get it from the island of Ireland, or unless we get a company to brush harvest from a certain site. Generally, it's not going to be local to your site. But what you do get from seed application is, although it is quite expensive, native seed is expensive, is the product you're getting, the amount of seed you're putting on, and if done correctly, you will get good results from a seed application. But there is the cost. Green hay strewing is another low cost method, which does get very excellent results. You still have to do the ground preparation as you would for seed, but green hay strewing is, we would go onto a site which is similar to yours, similar soil types. You would go in, you would cut the hay, and you would bale it on the same day, and then you would spread it out. Now, because seed drop happens quite soon, within hours of it being cut, you really need to be baling in the morning and spreading that green hay out in the afternoon. It can't be stored because the bales would heat, and that the seed starts to drop quite rapidly. So generally, you have to be relatively near to your donor site, but you do get excellent results because you're lifting and shifting the whole crop. Well, not the whole crop actually, because you can probably, a half a hectare of hay would probably do a hectare of restoration site, and then you would take to the site, you'd spread it out, get a hay bob, spread it out, and let it dry on your site, and turn it on your site, run the livestock over it, and then look for the results in the following year in terms of those germination. Very, very good method, low cost, although it does require a lot of effort, in terms of spreading it out. Another method is looking at bale and rolling, and it's similar to green hay strewing, except you would dry the hay and turn the hay and bale it as a hay crop. But what you would do is then you would take the hay off that site, and then you would spread it out and feed to your livestock either in autumn or winter grazing. And although you do lose through the hay turning and the actual baling, you do lose a lot of seed, you still get some transference of seed, and you can get some really excellent results doing that bale and rolling and spreading out species-rich hay, as well as getting good diverse hay for your livestock. You're also spreading that seed both through their gut and as they tread and move around the site. So on a whole, always local is always better, and always look for, when you're looking at donor sites, is really looking for similar soil types. So if you're restoring a neutral grassland, you want to go to another neutral grassland rather than going to a more acidic grassland or calcareous grassland, and you can get that information by, as I said before, by doing your soil tests at the beginning of your restoration. Creating establishment niches. Well, existing grassland that that we have. So if we picked our site and it's a kind of semi-improved grassland, it's then it's going to need significant disturbance prior to sowing in order to create areas for that seed that we're transferring onto the site for it to germinate, whether that's through the green hay or whether that's through broadcasting the seed. So when sowing from seed, we really need high bare ground levels, and research has shown that really it needs to be at least 50% bare ground. So if you're going to a site and you're broadcasting a seed, you need to be looking down and it being 50% vegetation and 50% bare ground. So what you would do is, for example, you would go in and cut the vegetation before and take away its hay, and then scarify that ground using a harrow or a power harrow to get that bare ground. And really, from 50% to 70%, there is a growth, in the kind of that germination. After about 70% bare ground, it remains the same really. So creating those establishment niches, what we need is that soil seed contact is essential. So we need that bare ground. So we're looking to broadcast our seed. All these plants, they've developed the byproduct of agriculture. All these wildflower, wildflower grasslands or hay and meadows, they drop their seed, and that's so that's what we need to do. We need to mimic that. We need to be broadcasting it. We don't bury it, and then we can roll it or light graze afterwards to increase that soil seed contact. So when we're looking at seed, don't sow, like, you can get seed grass mixes, grass and wildflower mixes in one. If you're looking to sow an existing grassland, use a wildflower only mix, because essentially you're paying to put something that's already there. It's the wildflowers we want in that case, unless you're looking at a site that is really impoverished and it's only got a few grass species. But generally, if we're going into a semi-improved, species poor grassland, we're introducing the wildflowers, we just want the wildflower seed itself. So another key point is restoration sites need to be clean, weed-free seed beds. So else we're just creating problems for ourselves. So increasing establishment success. So post and pre-grassland establishment weed control is essential. We need, species like ragwort and docks. The seed can remain, in the soil for decades. So if you've had a problem with these species in the past in that field and you still get a problem, you may want to reconsider using that site, or else you're going to have to do some significant weed control, pre and before. One thing that we've seen, particularly in areas that have problems with molluscs, and you'll know yourself if you get problems with that with your crops, is they significantly, if you control mollusk abundance, it significantly increases the establishment of sown forbs. So there's no good spending significant amounts of money on buying a native seed mix, if it's just going to get munched after you've seen. But you'll know yourself if you have issues with that, and then you can put that management in place just for that first year of establishment, just while their flowers are established in that first year. And again, one that there's a lot of literature supporting the use of Rhinanthus, which is yellow rattle. The use of red rattle is highly successful in reducing competition from grasses. It's a semi-parasitic plant, and it will. And a lot of the work that we're trying to do in establishing these meadows initially is trying to knock the grasses back a bit to give the wildflowers a chance to germinate and to succeed. Rhinanthus can increase quite rapidly. Initially, it tends to level out, but you can control it if there's too much in this ward. In later years, you can have earlier cutting or grazing, as long as it doesn't conflict. If you're in an EFS, doesn't conflict with that. Traditionally, managing yellow rattle, meadows weren't in as a meadow, every year they would change around the farm, and so some years they would get grazed as pasture, and then that would reduce the amount of yellow rattle, which is an annual. So, but key to success in knocking those grasses back and restoring our grasslands. Again, good management post-establishment is essential, and depending on how successful that establishment is, and if you find there's a weed burden coming up, that first year you may not want to put it in for example, a hay meadow management. You may want to cut it and keep that if you're getting a problem with weeds. But being able to adapt to that by seeing what comes up post establishment, it is key. So as I said before, grasslands are, they're not here because our forefathers were great naturalists and loved loved wildlife. They're here because they're byproducts of traditional agriculture. They're a suite of plants that have established and evolved in types of management, and along hay meadow management or extensive grazing. So our management should seek to mimic that. We need to be that they are farmed environments, and they need to be farmed. And also they're dynamic habitats, and our intensity of management is going to influence the success of that grassland. So, for example, when we're looking at things like cutting dates, if you're in EFS, that's going to be set. You need to look at your prescriptions and work to that. But certainly if you're establishing wildflowers in the first certainly 5 years, you really want to have that late hay cut. We really want to have as many of those seeds many of those wildflowers set in seed as possible before we cut, just so we can build up that seed in the seed bank and get more germination, as much as possible. When we've actually got good establishment, then the date, that cutting date, it doesn't matter. It can vary. I mean, a lot of our species, they're long-lived perennials. Some of them live for decades, and so that plant only needs to germinate once within its lifetime and successfully grow, and it's been successful and replicate itself. So I mean, traditionally farmers would went in when the crop is at its best, they would have cut it. These grasslands are established over millennia, some of them, some of our best grasslands. So in how we manage those sites will have a direct implication on our success. So a good word, early on in establishment, later hay cuts. Afterwards, it can vary as long as we're getting really that kind of July hay cut really. So grazing. So grazing animals, large herbivores, they are essential to the long-term successful restoration of species grasslands, of all grasslands. We cannot manage wildflower grasslands or meadows by mechanical management alone. We can't replicate what a herbivore can do with a machine, whether that's in the way they graze, in the way they're treading vegetation down, their hoof prints creating niches for germination, they're defecating and seeds passing through them, and we can't replicate it, and they're essential. So if some people maybe not have grazing animals, but they're looking to restore grasslands, you really need to be including livestock in some form or another on that grassland for it to be successful in the long term. And we would aim to achieve grazing levels that remove most of the year's growth outside the main growth period. If you're in EFS, those dates are set and you have to work through them. But really, if you're managing pasture, you're having lower grazing levels within the flowering period, and then increasing towards the end of the year to clean the sward up. Again, with hay meadows, you would be having that aftermath grazing and then closing up or restricted grazing in the winter period. So limiting winter grazing levels is important to rest your grassland, or essentially, because an open sward in winter can lead to problems with weeds such as creeping thistle, etc., and species like hogweed, like to take root in meadows that are being winter grazed. It's not saying you can't winter graze. I winter graze myself with my cattle. That's my cattle. They're outside at the minute, but it's very extensive, and they're moved on regular. So we do need to limit grazing or exclude in winter. So I thought to talk. You've heard me gabble on about establishment and management. Well, I thought I'd just show you a few kind of results here. This is come from seeds. This is kind of results you can get from seed if managed well. This was a site in the West Midlands that I had sown out, and you can see actually there's a bit of clustered dock in there. So the weeds do get through, but as long as they're not massive amounts, and that's no great shakes. But yeah, you can see oxide daisy done fantastically well. That's quite common. That tends to become less dominant and more just frequent over time. But if you look in at the sward there, actually, we've got a really good high uptake of herbs there. We've got grasses, we've got crested dog's tail, I can see. We've got meadowgrass and red fescue. But in terms of the species there, I can see the wildflower species. You've got knapweed, you've got oxide daisy, and you've got the lady's bedstraw coming up there. So all those signature wildflower meadow species, coming in good numbers, and that's the kind of result. That's costly because the seed is costly, but if done correctly, you can get a stonkingly good result from that. Really, really impressive, and with the right management, you really getting towards that kind of priority habitat in a relatively short period of time. So I mentioned before about bale unrolling, and I thought I'd show it an example of that. So this is what I mentioned: the species-rich hay had been turned, it'd been baled and stored, and then unrolled in the winter, or you could do it in the autumn. It doesn't really matter. So you can see this strip of wildflower there. That was just where the bale was rolled out. The cattle have gone in, they've grazed, they've trodden, they've defecated, they've lied, slept on it. And then afterwards you get a bit of mulch here, such on your right there. But with the earthworms, that's gone by the summer, and this is what you're left with. Okay, it's a big stripe of wildflowers, but you've got the wildflowers in your field. And actually repeated doing that over time, you're going to increase, and then as your livestock are grazing that and moving through that, they'll spread that through the whole field. And that's a good, cheap method of bringing wildflowers onto your farm and into your pasture or hay meadows. And that's not expensive. You don't need to do a lot of disturbance because the cattle are doing the disturbance there by treading it in and treading that mulch in. So that is, I thought that'd be a good example to show you that a successful route. That's all knapweed there. The photo's gone. There was also stuff coming up there, oxide daisy, and lots of legumes coming up in there, particularly red clover. So in the group schemes, the EFS group schemes, so support. So we got support by from your officers to help draw up your plans. As many of you know, because many of you are already in EFS, but there are numerous options on there looking at different grassland types, management and restoration, and also within there, which is I didn't really go into, but it is as important. It's actually the infrastructure to facilitate that grazing management to take place. So there's options in there for your fencing, for gates, etc., to facilitate that management. So we can offer technical advice as well. So there's me, Katie, and Mark, more than happy to answer questions, and where we can't answer them, we've got RSPB. I've got a whole host of experts and ecologists who, if we can't answer the question, they should be able to. Something I thought worth putting up in here was one-off grants. I mean, it sounds a bit vague, but actually, in every year I've been with the RSPB now, which is coming into my third year, is one-off grants. there seems to be quite a thing in Northern Ireland. And last year I was aware of two that they were paying for wildflower seed costs. They'll pay for seed and establishment 90% of the costs. So it's worth, what we will do is keep our ear to the ground, and we'll make you aware through our groups if we have them come out, because something like paying for your seed for if you wanted to do some restoration on your farm is a significant cost. 9% of that, it is no small thing. So we'll keep an ear out for that. It's a bit early on in the season yet. That kind of thing we'll become aware at probably in late spring, early summer. So we'll keep you aware of that. Another thing that we're just starting to develop now is a kind of what we're thinking about is a hay directory, and that's looking at how do we put farmers in touch with each other, and so if you've got a meadow, it's a wildflower meadow, a species meadow, could someone come and buy your hay or buy your green hay? And it's about looking at how we can get people in touch to start sharing that resource, because very much it's quite often that's a limiting factor. Seed can be expensive. It's okay if we've got a grant to pay for it, but it can be expensive. And actually, green hay strewing is a cheaper option, and is highly successful, as is the bale grazing and using species-rich hay. So what we will want to do is try and develop a directory for the different counties where we can put people in contact with each other. But that's in development at the moment. Well, that's it. Happy to field any questions. I hope that wasn't too much of a gallop through. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Fran. That was great. Very interesting, that species-rich hay baling as well. I know that there's a few farmers in County Down. I'm sure their ears pricked up there. It's the mention of that there. I think they may already be doing a little bit of that, so that sounds great. Is there any questions there for Fran? There was a couple of questions in the chat box there. There's one for Katie. Katie's answered Réamaí's question there. We have a question from Vincent McAlinden there to myself or to Fran. Are you hearing any noise from EFS policy that measures like species-rich grassland might move to be allowed as add-ons to existing scheme participants? Similar noise was made about the organic measure, but nothing has come out yet. I think I have a question around it. I think just an answer to Vincent's question there, Fran, unless you or Katie have heard any different. I mean, as far as I'm aware, the EFS agreements, like, they are that sort of 5-year agreement. They're not flexible in that regard. I know that I think currently, there's tranche, because we're now in going to be coming into tranche 6. I know that some of the tranche 1 farmers have been contacted about sort of renewing their contract on a sort of yearly basis, because obviously the environmental farming scheme was European funding, so there'll be I think there'll be another couple of tranches perhaps, and then there'll be a new agri-environment scheme developed for Northern Ireland. But I'm not sure, Vincent, if I've heard anything about having like add-ons like that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just might be that I'm not aware. What about you, Fran? Have you heard anything like that?
No, I'm not aware of the add-ons. Say similar to you, really. By extension.
Okay. Yeah, we can potentially follow up with that one, Vincent, but not that we're aware then. So let me just ask the questions here. So we have a question from Réamaí there.
Can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Oh,
can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Fra, have you ever used instead of the green hay, have you ever used a leaf blower in reverse to harvest seed? It's a really effective.
I haven't used a leaf blower, no, but what I have done is use a brush harvester. So that's kind of a modified forage harvester with brushes on it to collect it. I was actually going to put it in the talk, but I've only actually used it twice in my career, so I thought it's a bit niche, so I didn't mention it. But that sounds interesting.
The leaf, I've done quite a few meadows with leaf blowers and in reverse, and it's a cheap way to get a lot of seed very quickly, and you can target. So it saves the transportation of green hay, and you just go in whenever whatever species you're after. But I mean, we had some wonder. I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the start of my talk, but it was great for getting seed, local seed, and project I was involved, we just worked in seed that was in 10-12 mile radius, and it was so you're getting that really local genetic stock, and it was the leaf blowers it's cheap. They're cheap to buy. You could get, okay, there's going to be grass seed and a lot of things mixed in, but you're going to get maybe several kilos off. And so what we did was we went in and we would harvest seed sort of every sort of width, maybe a meter or 2 meter width, and then skip a lane and then go again. So you're always leaving enough seed for the meadow itself to rejuvenate. But you could get big amounts of seed very cheaply and very, very effectively, and we're ready to go and spread effectively the same day.
Yeah, no, I'm really interested in seeing that and doing that actually. No, I'd say with the brush harvester, the similar thing in that it leaves the crop. So if you want to go at different times, it actually still leaves the crop intact, so you can still get a hay crop off it, but it takes we did that on a few sites where we were severely limited. Even going in the UK, there's a company called Emmersgate, and they would sell native seed, but we were really restricted on this SSI about where that seed could come from. So it had to be harvested from around the SSI itself. So we used a brush harvester, harvested the seed, dried it off. We actually had a company take it and dry it off, and they did a seed calculation as well, so they're identifying the species from the seed to give us an idea of what we had, and then we broadcast it. But you don't need to do that. But
no,
yeah, yours sounds a more simplified and cheaper way of doing that. So yeah, very interesting.
I'm all for stuff that's easy.
No, me too, definitely.
Thanks.
Was great. Thanks for that, Réamaí. There's a question from Stephen there, the Ballybully Dexters. Are you missing out on smaller farmers who are not part of an EFS scheme? So yeah, I suppose EFS, you have to have well, it's over 3 hectares of eligible land that could enter into some of the different options. So there's lots of wider options are available, but in terms of the species rich grassland, that tends to be more for the higher level. So I suppose it does limit obviously some farmers, but there is then, I think that part of why then Franz mentioned the those one-off payments, like I think Fran, am I right, like it might be early in the season, there hasn't been anything just as of yet, but it was things like the Ulster Beekeepers Association and different people like that in the past had one-off grants and things like that outside of the EFS scheme. But it's definitely something Stephen, I know would be keen to follow up further with you on that in terms of the potential there down on the farm for EFS or even outside of EFS as well.
What I would say is, as well, on top of that, is you can still get advice from RSPB, even if you're not in the EFS or a group scheme. You can still approach RSPB and ask about this, and we're more than willing to give advice and chat to you about it. So yeah, there may be limitations with the EFS itself, but in terms of the advice and support we can give, we would do that to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in County Down, for example, I've got just over 20 farmers in the EFS group for those with EFS agreements in place. But we work with about 80 different farms across the county, that are within EFS, that are outside of EFS. So it's not exclusive our advice to the EFS groups. I'm conscious of time there. Is there any other questions, or are we happy to? I think we were going to take just a 5-minute comfort break just to give people a little bit of time to just to have a toilet break or make a wee cup of tea there. So what we'll do, we'll rendezvous back. It's just turning 8:10 now, so just about 15:15 if everyone can be back, and then we're going to have the final talk of the evening from Réamaí, and yeah. So see you all back very soon. Okay, everyone, I think we're just going to get started again here soon. So we're going to hear from Réamaí Mathers now, talk about wildlife root swards and plants of importance for animal health and productivity. So Réamaí, if you have a presentation there, just feel free to start sharing.
Is that up there?
Perfect, that's you.
Okay. You want me to start when you're ready, or wait a bit yet?
No, I think we're good to go there. It's just after 1:15 now, so people should be back. So take it away there, Réamaí.
Okay. Listen, in the first instance, I suppose I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Réamaí Mathers. I am involved with another farmer with Glens on flower-fed Dexter beef, and I also, to put my cards on the table, I also am an environmental consultant, among other things. So I wanted to take when Fra asked me to do this, I suppose I wanted to take a slightly different take, and I saw the other two talks were very much on traditional sort of hay meadows or wildflower meadows. So I wanted to sort of move into the more I suppose the normal productive grassland, which would be usually sort of lolium, you know, or which would be used to produce beef. So I'm going to run through how we can maybe reconsider what we're going to do with these more improved grasslands, I suppose the term that's used. So just a little bit of background. Our farm enterprise is quite a small one, so part-time, as most farmers are. Small farm, about 50 acres in the Glens of Antrim, very exposed. Actually, look over the Mull of Kintyre across that way. Very exposed to clay soils, sandstone bedrock. And the cattle we keep Dexters mainly, and some black Galloways, and we also keep Clyn sheep. The reason why we keep these species is because they're hardy, they're tough, and they can calf by themselves. So fundamentally, I'm a farmer who doesn't want to do very much work, and so these animals do it. They're traditional breeds. Clyn's a very hardy ewe and produces a really good quality lamb, and again, as the black Galloways, it's almost a local. We're only probably 20 miles from the Galloway coast where we are, less, probably 15. And then the Dexter's traditional Irish breed. So all these animals can more or less get on with themselves. They don't need any particularly good treatment. The cattle are finished for beef, usually between 24 and 30 months. Might go a little bit more. It was a particularly small animal, just to get a bit more meat on it. But they're all raised pasture fed, and that's an important point. It's pasture as opposed to grass fed. We have this thing with grass fed. Pasture is a much wider thing than grass. We're considering all the other species that live within the grassland, so that's why I use the term pasture. So some of the products we have, as I said, so pasture fed, flower fed. We call it flower fed because we're looking at to increase all the time the diversity of our pastures in a productive sense, in terms of an improved grassland sense. And it's mostly Dexter beef we're doing at the minute. We sell them to homes in beef boxes, and we're looking at flower-fed lamb this year, and we're seeing if that's a potential for looking at that as well. Are the advantages of pasture-fed animals? I would say yes, in terms of the flavour, but there's generally seen to be less fat, more omega-3 fatty acids, linoleic acid, and antioxidants and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go too heavily on that, but that would be seen by lots of people as the advantages of pasture-fed animals. So our animals get no meal, so it has to come from the soil. That needs to do it for us at all times. Sheep we get no meal as well, and maybe a little bit a week or so before lamb, but we're trying to cut that back more and more as we improve our farm system to get them to a complete, both ewes and lambs. All lambs are completely pasture-fed, but we want to move that way with the ewes as well. Just to let you know a wee bit of background in wildflower meadows as well. I was involved in the Glens Great Grassland project, among other projects. This is a nice wee project that we produced a booklet for. If you put on Glens Great Grassland Trail online, you'll see the PDF will come up and show you the project that was involved in. So just to let you know, this is Ballycastle Golf Course. Guy playing golf, and you can see the species-rich meadows starting to take off behind them. We had a lot of success with this scheme. Unfortunately, it was all on public lands. Unfortunately, some of the councils then, even though they said they would upkeep them, have not upkept them the way they are. But there's still a lot of successes in the Glens of Antrim region. And as you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a tractor harvesting Ballycastle Golf Course, and that is me every year. Well, I'm not in the tractor, but we cut the silage off it every year at the end of the season. So I'm actively still involved, even though the project's over, as managing one of the sites in terms of harvesting it every year, so that natural, semi-natural grasses can continue. And just for I'll come back to the point I was saying to you about the leaf blower in reverse. That's all we use to put the seeds onto these sites, and they're really successful. There were some specific species then we used, which were things like meadow cranesbill and wood cranesbill that we did under license. So they are now growing on some of these sites as well. And they were put in as plugs, but doing very well and starting to spread. So again, some of this stuff doesn't have to be very difficult. We also carry out these are my colleagues who works with me in the Glens of Antrim Flower Fed, Dexter. This is a grassland that one of them is again a council grassland, Causey Coast and Glens Council. This is in Glenariff, in the Glens of Antrim, and you can see this on the left hand side. That is what it looks like in the summer now, and this was overgrown for years, really hadn't been touched, grazed, anything. It was a crazy golf course for a while, so it's sort of a dune slack system along the road, small, 4 or 5 acres. It's now used for winter in Dexter's. And so Eamon, the other guy who works with me at Dexter's, has them there. And you can see the house in the summer photograph, and that's it to the right in the winter photograph. So you can see the difference between summer and winter, and then the great job that the cattle do in removing that vegetation, so to allow the germination of the next generation. And obviously their dung and everything else is doing its job there within the system. So, and I just want to point a lot of the plants in this meadow that we'll see here. There's things like ribgrass or ribwort plantain. There's bird's foot trefoil, and there's white clover. They're really important plants that I'll be talking about later on, or certainly some of them, certainly the clover and the plantain. But these are really important plants in terms of productive, and I mean improved grasslands as well, not just meadow grasslands. So I do in my sort of consultancy work, I do a lot of work on farm resilience. So tonight I'm going to just do one part, but just thought I'd touch on this very briefly. So we look at how to improve farm sustainability using green infrastructure, so nature's benefits really impact, and we look at things like the impact at a farm-to-farm basis, the impact of climate and landscape. So that's wind, sun, aspect, relief. Then we look at the livestock. Is the livestock the right animal? So we work very closely with the farmers. We certainly don't go in and tell farmers what to do. We work very closely with the farmers, and I know Stephen Alexander. I've done some work with him. He's in the meeting tonight on some of his projects on his farms. And then we look at swards, alternative farm business opportunities, and then we look at management changes, soil management changes, breed changes, sward changes, access to managers, and then how trees and hedges can be important in some farm situations in terms of water management, wind. And we look at diversification. So it's looking at a more broader sense beyond grasslands, but also looking at the whole farm. And there's a whole lot of different talks in there for different days, but we're not going to that in too much depth tonight. Just want to touch on current grazing systems. We have our current grazing systems in terms of improved grassland has focused very hard on one main species, perhaps two. Perennial ryegrass, which is lowland perennial, and it produces about 13 tonne of dry matter per hectare per season. You have Italian ryegrass, again, which is more of an annual, or certainly only sort of persists for a few seasons, and that can produce 18 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. So in terms of the productive farmer, they're looking for quality and they're looking for amount. These plants have been the backbone of the modern grazing systems. There's no doubt about that. You go into most seed sellers and say, most farmers will walk into the local farm shop and let's say I'm reseeding the field, and they'll say, there you go, there's a high sugar blend. It'll be 3 or 4 cultivars of perennial ryegrass and maybe 1 of white clover or 2 of white clover, and that'll be it. The greygrass will be sown in. The first time a docking pops its head up, the farmer will go out and spread the whole field to kill all the dockings, but also kill all the clover, so you're just left with ostensibly with ryegrass. So a phenomenal plant, really important plant, and still will be a really important plant. But the implications of that and the systems we're using, it's dependent on high fertilizer inputs, and it's a really interesting change in finances at the moment. For any of you guys on your land that would use urea, so for nitrogen early in the year, and urea is only 46% nitrogen. So urea at the minute, my last check, the Finn Valley was £820 a tonne. So that means nitrogen, if that's 46% nitrogen, nitrogen now is £1,783 per tonne. And so that's becoming, to get this grass to grow the way it needs to, or has been grown in highly productive systems, the nitrogen certainly is really expensive, and all fertilizer's gone up. So I'm just focusing on nitrogen for now because that's the big one that people push in the spring. But we also look at then what is the implication for the animals that are grazing. Well, it's a single species diet, so the equivalent I would say to farmers is it's like eating white bread all day. It limits the macronutrients you're getting lots of calories, you're getting lots of goodness in lots of ways, but you have a limitation in your micronutrients. You have your vitamins and minerals, for example, and the opportunities for self-medicating, which animals will do naturally, aren't there if they're stuck with one species all the time. And so therefore there's an increase in the use of boluses, licks, and medications because the animals can't self-medicate. They don't get the amount of vitamins and minerals they need from the system because they're only in one species, and that species is a very shallow root, which I'll touch on later, so it can't really mine minerals from the deeper soils like other species can, that we'll touch on. So then we fall back on boluses and licks and to solve that problem. So one sort of limits and creates a almost domino effect that we need more and more stuff. Now, I'm not saying ryegrass is still a phenomenal species, and we need to use it, but it's just when it's a one size fits all, these are the issues that have come up. And this is really demonstrated in this graph. Ryegrass dominant swards have been our most productive pasture, I said, in the last 80 years. They are very responsive fertilizer. However, this has implications. And this is a piece of research carried out, now it's going back to 2002, but I'd say it's probably worse than that now. So it shows the decline of the mineral content in food, and this is particularly in meat, but it's also the same in vegetables. So we look at the declines in the minerals in what we eat. So basically, we have animals now that are better fed than ever, but malnourished in many ways in terms of the way compared to what they would have been in the past. So I don't want to over-egg that, but there is science behind it showing that there has been a decline. So why is that the case? And again, I would hark back to browsers like cattle are not designed to eat one species all day. And then soil and pasture alternatives. So general increase in fertilizer prices, we've touched on that. Declines in organic matter and declines in minerals derived from soils passed to plants and animals causes increase in farm costs. So I talked about the licks and the need for medications, etc. So soil gives health, and I think it's the most important thing, and some of the other speakers have touched on that. Soil is the most important, for me, the most important thing in a farm. We can't control the weather, but we certainly, and we can't really control the underlying rock. We obviously cannot control the underlying rock, and we can't control a lot of things that are sort of in the basis of our soils, but we can work with our soil to improve it, to improve the biota of the soil, so the bugs that live in the soil, and help them to produce more quality yield for us and for the animals that are using it. So soil gives health and receives it from the rocks, weather, plants, fungi, and animals. So these are the animals could be big animals, or they could be the microorganisms that are living in the soil. So the big animal could be the cow itself. The small animals are the tiny microscopic microorganisms that make up actually a huge part of soil. So the underlying rock dictates soil type, overlying vegetation impacts organic matter, and these are two very important examples. So by planting a more mixed range of species, if we take here the perennial ryegrass on the graph at the top, is showing the production of a perennial ryegrass system. And then red clover system it produces less in terms of overall mass. Chicory produces a bit more in red clover in terms of biomass, but less. And then the average of each is kind of low. But when you actually put all those species together into one system, the average goes way up to 50% extra. So there's this whole synergy within using different plants within the same sward. And another useful point is that there's a different growing time for each plant. So if you as a farmer are trying to graze animals across the season, we've got to consider when's the peak time for each species. So we know that ryegrass, depending on the species, we can get later cultivars and earlier cultivars of lots of species. We've got to consider that as well. So it peaks at certain times of year, but then in this case, if you look at the legumes, which is clovers and stuff like that, they peak a little bit later. So you're getting a sort of a more balanced flow of nutrients and fodder across the season. So basically diversity can be a good thing. Talk about soil chemistry and biology. The physical structure of the soil can impact on soil chemistry, and soil chemistry can impact on soil structure. So the two things feed each other. The mineral soils, so we're not going to talk about peaty soils in this particular one. They're composed of minerals from underlying rocks. It touched on humus, which is decomposed plants and animals. And then there's earthworms, microbugs, fungi, which is mycelium, the mycorrhiza, which is these little guys on the left, really, we're looking at. Bacteria, dormant seeds, etc., etc. On the right, then, we have really important interactions. This is the roots of plants, and in this case, this is the root of a clover, a legume. And the little nodules in that right picture are where the action takes place, which we'll come to next. It was basically where little homes are provided for bacteria that can do a magical thing, and that is they can take nitrogen from the air and make it available to the clover, the legume, and the plants around it as well. So it's a really, really powerful thing that we forgot, I suppose, in many ways, with the advent of the plastic bag. Open a plastic bag solves all issues, but yeah, certainly in the past, our forebears used these species much more effectively, and I think we're probably heading back to that in some form. Soil pH is a really important thing in terms of productive pasture, and again, I'm talking about improved pasture in this. So optimum pH for pasture is about 6.5, 6.5. At this level, the soil organisms are very productive, and the pasture can absorb maximum nutrients. Really interesting quote: if you put fertilizer in your soil and you had a pH of 6.5, and your pH drops to 5, you'll lose almost 50% of the fertilizer because your plants can't absorb it. The soil and the plant, they can't absorb it because the pH is lower. So pH in itself is not a fertilizer or lime or whatever you want to use it in itself. A lot of people are using crushed eggshells now as well because it's a recyclable resource that has been put on the soil, and it's got that whole recycling local project, which is a good thing in terms of our own energetics. But that huge drop between 6.5 and 5, you can lose 50% of your fertilizer. And for years, people have been putting lots of fertilizer, artificial fertilizer, for example, on soils that weren't able to cope with it. And therefore, there might as well be, there's a big pollution implications, but there's a big financial implications. So really important. So the organisms are very important, and you can see across the graph that with the maximum absorption of different nutrients at different pHs, and you can see they're around 6.5 is around maximum for most of them. So that's why we look for that for soils. The main nutrients that I'm going to focus on now are nitrogen, phosphorus, which is P, and potassium is K. Nitrogen, 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen, and so that's something that we need to think about. It's all around us. It's like the ancient what's the call of the ancient mariner? Water everywhere, not a drop to drink. So we need to find a way to get that water into our soil systems, and we have a magical tool for doing that. But if we put too much N and P on the systems, we get pollution. If we put too much K on, we get things like grass tetany and milk fever. So we've always got to be careful about the balance of what we're doing. It's wasteful to put too much of anything on, but it's also polluting to the environment. So soil structure, and this is the thing I would talk a lot to farmers about. Think vertically. Lots of farmers are very, very concerned about losing, 2 or 3 feet of the side of a field, or 2 meters side of a field for a hedge, which is a whole other conversation. But there's a lot of advantages of using hedgerows and properly managed hedgerows and farm systems, but that's for another day. But they really can have a fantastic influence. But you also got to think very down. What's happening under my feet? So it's not just soil is not just something that you walk on. So if you look, this is a graph I got from Cotswold Seeds, with permission of Cotswold Seeds, which is a really good website to go and look at in terms of educating yourself about the plants and species you can use in grassland. So improved grasslands particularly. But so if you have a range of different species, you have an increase in micronutrients to the forage, because a lot of these species have much deeper root. If you look to the left-hand corner, there's the second plant across is ryegrass. Look at the size of the root; it's tiny. But then you go across to things like yarrow, things like plantain, and they have much deeper roots, so they can actually mine nutrients much deeper in the soil. Down into the subsoil, there's lots of nutrients that are coming from the rock and much closer, and they can be taken up and put into the forage effectively. Having a wide range increase the length of the growing season because we have different species doing different things at different times of year, even different grasses. Timothy, for example, which we'll talk about, is good at the front end and the back end of the season. Grows better under cooler temperatures, and therefore, so if we mix in different species, we get again that more balanced forage. And then when you have wider species, you have a significant increase in water storage and water drainage, so there's a better water balance in your soil system. And some species contain anti-parasitic properties, so useful things to consider. Multi-species swards in action. I have a couple of multi-species swards in our own farm. Of course, I was talking about this for years and really need to do it myself, but because, so we finished all our lambs off this last year, no meal at all. They finished far more quickly. Now, I've looked at some other farms and they've kept sort of much tighter figures and they have some fantastic results. But we know ourselves that we certainly finished our lambs most of them a lot more quickly last year, and certainly at decent weights. The important things with these multi-species sward is not to graze them tightly. I don't think it's clever to graze any sward tightly, because you reduce its potential for photosynthesis and growing again, and you also, some species then get taken out really. Mob grazing is probably the best approach, but it's not the only approach. It's certainly the best. And a mixture of species providing a balanced diet like anti-worming properties and large amounts of protein, high palatability, and access, if you have access, can be used as silage. So some species and management options to consider, and really understanding and identifying only a few pasture species. So in my experience, myself, most farmers actually have very little knowledge about grassland species, which when you consider about most farmers, I have no real interest in machinery, though my son could tell me every implement, every tractor on the road, everything, whereas that's his thing. But I think in a farming system, we also need to understand the most important thing: our soils and the plants that grow on the soils, because they're driving the whole system for us. And I suppose one way it never ceases to amaze me that there's so little knowledge around the pasture species. I think it's something we need to be trained up on and really understand them in a much better way. Gone are the days we can open a plastic bag and solve all our problems. We need to go back to understanding more what we're dealing with. And that's just a general. It's not obviously not for it's not everyone's situation. So understand and identifying only a few species can certainly increase the potential to produce better pasture quality animals with reduced costs. These species will need a change in management. You should limit set stocking. Set stocking is probably not a very good system in terms of, certainly during the grazing season, in terms of these productive improved pastures. Rotational grazing is what should be considered, and certainly consider paddock grazing or mob grazing, which mimics a more natural grazing cycle that would be happening if animals were allowed to roam as they would have across pasture land, and sort of come back every couple of months or whatever to graze a similar area when it come back. That's what they would have done naturally. Do not tightly graze. Pasture should remain at least 6 inches, but more probably. And paddock grazing says it leaves more behind. Remember, to feed animals, we must also encourage natural fertility in the soil community. And we really need to understand the soil is not dirt. Soil is a living community. So it's not dirt anymore. It's a living thing, and we need to treat it as such, just like we would any other piece of livestock, I suppose, on our land. But this is much more than livestock. It's a whole ecosystem. So I want to just talk about a few grasses you might consider to improve your grassland systems, your productive grassland systems. Talked about perennial ryegrass already. Again, it should never be ignored, I don't think, in productive grassland systems. But if we increase more diversity, it will increase cross system. It will improve our grazing system, particularly in lieu of less fertilizer. So fertilizer becoming so expensive. If you're going to be putting lots of fertilizers on and just going for the max, perennial ryegrass or Italian or those kind of things are your man. But if you're looking to do things a little differently, and maybe save yourself some money and still produce a really good beast at the end of it, but also with this little bit of diversity put in, you'll improve biodiversity as well. So that's the other thing that I haven't talked about too much in this, but it's an underlying theme in all this. So perennial ryegrass lasts about 5 years. It yields about 13 tonne of dry matter per hectare. It's flexible because you can you can graze it, you can cut silage, you can make haylage, you can make hay off it. So it's a kind of a very flexible species. So it's still the AAA grass in agricultural systems. Fasciololium is a new hybrid. So we could talk about lots of grass. We want to keep it fairly simple. We don't need to get bogged down in all the species. It's a new natural hybrid between ryegrass and festuca, which is fescus, which fescus are much tougher grass. So it combines the stress-resistant genes of the fescue, which basically they can more drought-resistant. And I know we laugh about now, but last summer was drought, and we need drought-resistant species as well. It's going to happen more and more. We're going to get sort of big changes in the weather, but tough enough that it can do well enough in the wetter conditions as well, and as we get the rest of the year. So Fesculum is another good plant to consider. It looks very much like, I've only in 2 pictures here put in the perennial ryegrass is the one on the left, but the Fesculum looks quite like it. So again, your grain merchant or seed merchant, if you have a good conversation with them, will help you on that. Timothy is a really extremely useful grass, flexible. It will grow very well in most soils, heavy ground and also lighter soils. It's hardy, persistent and disease resistant. So another real good grass to consider. The other weed grass we get very commonly across the landscape is Yorkshire fog. It sort of comes in everywhere. Not considered to be a very productive grass, but it's something we will we quite often have to live with in some cases. But if you're going to reseed, these are the kind of species I would be considering you to look at. But there are other species will come in, but these are mainly our productive species. Then I want to talk about 2 legumes. So legumes are these magical plants that can take this nitrogen from the sky, the 78% of the air we breathe. So red clover, particularly in silage ground now, there's a couple of issues around red clover that people get hung up on, like you can't feed it to ewes 6 weeks before topping, stuff like that, because it creates a kind of a false estrogen, so it can change their cycle. But really, lots of people who use a lot don't find much issues. But I mean, that's just, and for most cases, you're going to, if you're going to use a lot of red clover, it's going to be in silage, so it can fix huge amounts of nitrogen. So I just want to go through that again. It needs a good pH. Nitrogen fixation takes place when common soil bacteria and rhizobium invades the root. That was the picture earlier that showed you with the little nodules, and the bacteria convert inert N2 gas into biologically usable fertilizer. Red clover can fix up to 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare per year. That's a phenomenal amount, considering £820 a tonne is what we're paying for urea at the minute. So it's crazy. Grass silage needs approximately 125 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. So 1 tonne of urea is 3.6 hectares, would cover 3.6 hectares, whereas this guy can do it for you for free. The field on the right-hand side, so as my own field that we used for silage last year, our own field, and this is red clover coming through, and it was a phenomenal take. It was stitched in after we cut the silage the year before, and we had a really dry summer, if you remember. And then after the first cut, which is quite a dry cut, then this red clover really took off, really drought resistant, and we started getting a really good green show for the second cut. And the amount of butterflies in the field just before we cut it actually was phenomenal. There were hundreds. So feeding on the red clover, it's really an activorous plant and attracts lots of different species. The other big one is white clover, which comes, and lots of these all come in different cultivars. So white clover, 20 to 30% of sward, again fixes huge amounts of nitrogen, better for grazing. White clover can fix up to 180 kilos per hectare per year, and it's more persistent than red clover. But again, all these things need proper management. And as you can see, very good for biodiversity, bumblebees. I keep honeybees. Honeybees love this when the temperature's right. Really good plant for producing honey. And really good for a whole range of species as well. But it's a fertilizer maker. That's what it does. And any silage containing this is really palatable. The cattle or whatever really enjoy it. And I'm just going to touch on 2 herbs to consider. The first herb in your life is ribgrass. If any is aware of ribgrass, we used to call them tadpoles as a kid because of the wee black head and a sort of a tail going down the stalk. Considered a weed for many years. People would have probably sprayed it out of their field, but it's actually, like lots of things, it's about a little bit of knowledge, and it's a persistent mineral-rich plant because it mines deep with its root and takes up minerals from the subsoil. It's deep, drought-tolerant soil, and it's soil-conditioning roots. So when the roots die, the plant dies, huge amount of carbon left. Any of these long-rooted plants leave the carbon in the soil, so they're bringing carbon right down into the lower soil and really enriching the whole soil profile. It has a high protein content, around 20%. That's a phenomenal amount of protein, 13 to 20%, but 20%. That's a bit of information I stole of Cotswold Seeds actually this evening. but there's different ranges that people talk about. But certainly, if you're around 15-20%, that's a lot of protein in a fodder plant. Chicory is a deep-rooted soil conditioned plant. It's not as persistent as plantain, and probably needs a wee bit more management. Between 10 and 32% protein, depending on the plant's maturity. It can get woody if you let it grow too much, but again, if you graze too hard, you'll graze it out. So it's one of these things that we'll have to start thinking. Wonderful thing about chicory, like lots of browse, and I think is it's anti-worming. Tannins in the leaf are really good at reducing worms, and I am aware of farmers who actually don't worm their sheep anymore at all in the summer. They don't worm their lambs at all or treat them at all because they're grazing on these kind of chicory-rich pastures, so that, and they again finish very quickly because of the protein contents of the diet. And that's it. I just wanted to run through that. So I was trying to focus on 3 or 4 or 5 species. I think there's 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7 species there talked about tonight. We could talk about a whole lot more, but I would rather keep it simple. So we have really a lot of potential to improve the productivity of our improved grassland. It can improve animal health. It can improve production. It can reduce costs, but it also will have the added benefit of when you have a much more diverse sward, then you have lots of benefits in terms of your insect life, your bird life, etc., etc. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, that's me done. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Réamaí. Really appreciate that.
Right. How do I take this one?
There's a question from Vincent there in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, or if I read that out for you.
I'm trying to get out of my own talk now. That's the skill of this. Wonderful.
What I'll do, I'll share a holding page, which should
got it now.
Yeah. So yes, there's a question from Vincent there which says, so it's keen to hear your thoughts on balancing cattle grazing down herbage to desirable level and ending up with a poached erosion prone surface when cattle are kept on the same ground too long, or honeypot around water or feed buckets, when conservation grazing becomes degradation.
Again, I suppose I wasn't talking about conservation grazing when my talk was talking about, I suppose, productive grazing in terms of improved pastures, but just changing what we view as improved pasture. But I'm going back to conservation grazing. Again, for me, I mean, the EFS scheme will say what you should be, how long you should put in cattle in certain conditions, and I know my view is that if you understand grasslands, you keep an eye on things really, and then take them off when you know they're getting too hammered. It's as simple as that. It's not rocket science, and it depends what you're trying to manage for. So if you're trying to manage for example, in wildflower situations for example, marsh fertility, you're not trying to graze a system that's you're not trying to graze it to the floor. You're trying to graze it in a sort of a tussocky situation where you're not going to hit it too hard. Whereas if you're looking like the hay meadow situation that we have, my colleague grazes in Glenara, if we graze that fairly tight, and so it's almost like removing all the biomass, so the seed can generate and come through again. So I think conservation grazing becomes degradation when you don't watch what you're doing. It's not rocket science, but again, there's people there can certainly give you advice on that. I suppose that's what I have to say on that one. No other questions there?
Okay. If there's any other questions, just again, just feel free to follow up with us following the talk. But thanks very much again there, Réamaí. Oh, we have a question there from Crosby there. Sheep only grazing would the hybrid fescue be better than ryegrass?
It depends. Depends on your soil. What's your soil type, Crosby? What are you trying to achieve? I suppose I instinctively would try to look at blends of seeds. I think this we graze heavy soil as well, and I would be looking at, my wife and I would be looking at probably a varied a varied grassland. So in different years, because even on heavy, for example, we have heavy soil, but this year it was as dry as snuff, you know, with a real dry summer we had, and particularly with our farm for some reason didn't seem to catch any rain for most of the summer. And we end up having to feed hay in the middle of the year, which is very, very rare in our soil, which almost never dries out. So, and in that situation, I think the vigor of the fescue would probably come through. So it's very hard to get that balance right. And again, even with sheep only grazing, I think overgrazing is the biggest issue. That you know, I think you gotta get the animals off before it gets to the plant gets too short. Yeah, again, coming back to your comment there on ryegrass leaves too strong a stem, at 6 inches too high to per 4 inches of the chickweed and plantain. Is that a statement or a question? I'm not really sure. Statement, I think. Right, but yeah, ryegrass can get stemmy. Again, there's different cultivars of ryegrass that will mature at different times of year, and that's something also to be considered when you're thinking about your when you think about what you're putting in, so to get a more balance across your season. But I suppose the what I was alluding to there, and it's something we're all been challenged, I suppose, in many ways, to look at the more paddock-based system. It's more time-consuming in terms of moving beasts, but I suppose as technology improves, that'll become easier as well in terms of maybe what we can do in terms of the electric fencing systems, and maybe even things better than that are coming forward in the future. But I think that the whole philosophy of making sure that we have this fresh new leaf that's full of nutrition, we have to challenge that in some way as well, because I think it's very, very important that an animal's rumen is full and full of pretty high quality content. But you know, but I think it's also important we would get more production in terms of the grassland if we allow the grassland species, which includes the herbs and the legumes, to grow more, they grow taller and grow into bigger plants. It also means when you have a plant that's growing taller, its root goes deeper. So when you start to cut that grass or legume or whatever right down to the floor, the root actually dies off as well. So we're kind of looking for a more balanced system, and there's a lot of good research out there showing that these long grass systems or long pasture systems can be much more effective than the systems we've been using, particularly under a low fertilizer system. And I think that's the key. If we're moving away from the intensity of fertilizer, you know, that's maybe the way to go.
Okay. Thank you very much for the questions there, folks. We're just about going to finish up on time there. So just to finish there, so I just wanted to, again, just, you know, reiterate the support that's available there from RSPB, the EFS groups that we facilitate. So there's just the contact details again. You've got the Antrim Hills Curlew Initiative with Katie Gibb, who gave us the great talk there this evening. There's some of the contact details there. And thanks again for the group members who participated there tonight. And of course, if you know anyone, any farmers in that area, please do get in touch. We then had the Bann Valley Habitat Restoration Initiative with Francis Flanagan, who also gave the talk there this evening. There's Fran's contact details. Please do get in touch, and then you have mine there as well. And again, thanks to the members of the group that appeared there this evening. I really appreciate your time. And just to finish and to reiterate, you know, within each group, the farmers, you know, the idea is that, you know, you receive that ongoing support, training, advice. You know, we carry out the surveys and monitoring work, and then, you know, holding events like this, like these webinars. But we're hoping, you know, obviously, you know, with COVID and the restrictions, that as time moves on, we're going to be doing more, you know, on-farm demo events as well. And the whole idea is just to make sure that, you know, the farmers, the landowners that are members of the group, you know, feel fully equipped and inspired to deliver on, you know, the EFS agreements and help get the best results, not just for nature, but for the farm too. And as Fran had mentioned, you know, each of us, like Katie, Fran, myself, we're all actually registered planners within the environmental farming scheme. So, you know, we can put together the management plans for you to enter EFS at the higher level and provide all the advice and support that's needed along the way. But what was also mentioned as well, look, it's not, you know, our advice and support isn't just exclusive to the environmental farming scheme and the group members. You know, we're interested in speaking to any farmer that's interested in receiving some support or advice. So yes, once again, I just want to thank everyone for tonight, for all the speakers, to Katie and Fran and to Réamaí, and for all of you for joining us. As I said, the meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be sent around to everyone that took part tonight, or to anyone that has sent their apologies. So final thing to say is just thank you and have a good evening, and I hope to see and speak to some of you very soon. So thank you.